Hello, welcome back to Mindful May. Today I am working on this iPad case. I have really been into working on the iPad and Procreate and making digital art lately, and I wanted to take the iPad to a coffee shop to do some art and felt really bad just like stuffing it in my bag. It's my husband's iPad, I borrow it from him. So I made this really quick case, honestly like less than 10 minutes, just threw it together, and it doesn't look great. It functions, but I don't love it. So I wanted to take the time to make one and construct one that's a little bit better and more intentional in colors and patterns that I like. So let's jump into the materials I'm going to need for the project. I'm going to need main fabric, lining fabric, batting for in between. I'm going to be quilting this iPad case, bias binding for the edges, and then a closure. So I'm going to be using Velcro. I ended up having it in my stash. I don't remember where it came from, but you could use a button, you could use a magnet, you could use a tie, or just leave the flap as is. I feel like it would stay shut. You're also going to need scissors, pins, measuring tape, and a matching thread. I decided to use some fabrics that I had instead of going out and buying new things, and I'm really happy with my choice. I found this ditzy floral in my stash and then found some scraps from a pair of pants I made my sister. It's this blue and white gingham that I thought looked good together. And then I rummaged through my bias tape stash and found this blue. I think it's vintage. I thrifted it a while back, and I think it looks great with the ditzy floral. And as for batting, I purchased this cotton batting new. I really like natural fibers and I didn't have any more batting. I used the last of it for this makeup bag that I made recently. So I needed new batting, and I really liked the look and the feel and that this was a natural fiber. So those are all the materials. Next is the measurements. These are my iPad dimensions. My husband has the iPad 10, but you can easily Google your iPad dimensions. And I wanted to make this tutorial really simple for you so anyone can do it with any iPad you have. I actually ended up making an iPad template because my husband has it at work right now, so I just cut it out to the exact dimensions and then added seam allowance. So the measurements for the front piece, which is just going to be this rectangle, is going to be the width measurement of your iPad plus 1 inch, the length measurement of your iPad plus 1 inch. The back piece is just a little different because it has that flap added. So it's going to be the same width plus 1 inch and the same height, and then you're going to add 5 more inches to that. So you can cut that rectangle out, which would be your width plus 1 inch, your height plus 5 inches. You can cut that as a rectangle. And then I just folded mine in half and cut a half circle to make that kind of top curved edge. There wasn't any rhyme or reason to it. I just sketched it out and went with it. So all in all for this pattern, you're going to need 6 pieces, 3 of the front and 3 of the back. You'll have your main batting and lining and your main batting and lining. And then the first step of assembly is quilting the pieces together. So you will want the good sides of the main and the lining fabric to face outward, and then put the batting in between kind of as a sandwich. So when you flip either side, you should have the outside or good side of both of the fabrics. I just marked 1 inch lines down this and sewed them together. I pinned it really well so it didn't shift around too much, and then sewed straight lines on those 1 inch markings that I made. I did this for both the front and the back. If you've never quilted before, it's quite simple. You are just sewing a couple of layers of fabric together. I am using vertical lines. You could use diagonal lines, a crisscross design, but honestly, this gingham fabric really just helped me to sew straight vertical lines, so I went with that, and I really like the look of it. Here is the back piece all quilted, all 3 layers together. I'll do the same for the front piece, and then we can start sewing them together. Since this whole video is about an iPad case, I wanted to share more about my latest creative endeavor, which is digital art using my iPad and Procreate. I shared a little bit about this in recent videos, but I still have so much more to learn about Procreate and creating unique designs. So I'm excited to share today's sponsor, Skillshare, which is an amazing online creative community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative people. This is great if you want to learn a new skill or just deepen one that you already have. In my case, I'm learning a brand new skill, so I've been taking Lisa Bardot's class called Kickstart Your Creativity with Procreate. My favorite part, aside from learning new skills and techniques that I didn't have before, is actually the community. You can see other people who've taken the class and they upload their projects. We're following the same tutorial, but everybody's art looks different. And it's so cool to see my own creativity and my own preferences towards shapes and colors come to life, and it looks different from everybody else. And Skillshare isn't just for digital art. There are classes on illustration, photography, sewing, cooking, pretty much anything creative that you can imagine. The first 500 of you to click the link in my description or scan this QR code on the screen will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. It's the perfect time to explore your creativity. Get started today. Now that the front and back are both finished, I want to put bias binding on the top edge of the front piece. Because it's a raw edge right now, I need it to be covered and look nice, so I am using bias binding. I am going to sew it right sides together to the inside of the front piece. You'll just pin this along the top edge. If you've never used bias binding before, it's really simple. You can look up a quick tutorial. That's just a 2-step process of sewing it to the back side and then the good side. It finishes raw hems really nicely, and it's great for this project. So I'm just going to stitch this on with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. And then I'm going to pull the other side of the bias binding to the outside of my front piece and pin this down as well. And I will just use a straight stitch to sew this on. Now we have a nice clean edge for the top of our front piece. Here is the front and the back pieces. We are going to place them with the lining sides together. So my floral main fabric is on the outside. I'm going to pin along the 3 edges. And then we are going to sew on all 3 edges using a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Once this is sewn, I will grade the seams to get rid of some of the bulk before we add our bias binding. So I like to trim the edges and trim the corners, and then we will go about adding our bias binding on. I'm grabbing my bias binding, starting at the bottom center, and I like to fold in to the wrong side before I attach it. If you've never done this, it makes a really nice clean finish. And I'm just going to start pinning it around the case. I'm going to start with a few pins, but honestly, I don't like to pin it all the way around because bias binding is a little finicky, and I think it's better managed just by hand, especially around the curves. So I sew this part pretty slowly and take my time, again with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So this is what it should be looking like. You should have a tail of bias binding left. We'll clip that off. And then as you can see, we have a nice clean finish where the bias binding begins and ends. Now that the first step of the bias binding is done, I'm going to grade the seams again, just to cut down any bulk from the batting especially. And snipping the corners. Now it's time to change out my thread because I do want it to match and not be that contrasting white that I used before. Starting at the same point, I have the bias binding folded over, and we're going to secure it on all the way around the edge of the case. I will say I had a smaller bias binding. If you have like a 1-inch bias binding, I think it would work even better. I really had to pull mine to the front side just to cover up the raw edges. But this is the bias binding I had, so I made it work. The bias binding is attached, and now it's time to add our closure. So I'll find my 2 pieces of Velcro and start attaching those. I've pinned this on. I'm just going to sew it on in a square. I probably should have thought of this first. Sewing the top Velcro is easy, but the bottom portion is going to be a little tricky to sew it onto the front. There's no real method of measuring this. I just pinned it in place and made sure that the Velcro matched up. And then you'll just watch me struggle with this on my sewing machine, moving it all around so I can get all 4 edges and secure this Velcro on. But once the Velcro is on, our case is all done. Here is a little side-by-side of my 2 cases. I definitely prefer the one on the left. You can definitely tell a difference in the curve. It's much nicer on my new case, and I just like the colors a lot better. Thank you guys so much for joining me for this tutorial. I hope you make one. If you do, I would love to see it. If you want to tag me on Instagram or just mention it in the comments, or if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. This was definitely a stretch of a project for me. I usually make clothing for people and for bodies, not for inanimate objects. So this is a little different for me, but hopefully it is simple enough to follow along. Thanks again for being here. Subscribe to Mindful May for more tutorials and sewing inspiration, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers.